Hey everyone, and welcome back to Motivational Library.
Yeah, welcome back.
Today we're diving into a book that's, well, it's bound to stir up some interesting conversations.
Yeah,
Maybe even a little controversy.
for sure.
It's The Manipulated Man by Esther Vilar,
Oh, yeah.
originally published back in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
This book really kind of flips the script on traditional gender roles
Yeah?
and makes some pretty bold claims about power dynamics between men and women.
Absolutely.
Even the dedication itself is provocative.
Yeah, and I quote, "To the few men who refuse to be manipulated, to the few women who are not venal, and to all those fortunate enough to have lost their market value because they are either too old, too ugly, or too ill."
Wow. That's quite a statement.
It is.
So what exactly is Vilar getting at with this book?
Well, at its core, the book's premise is that men, in their pursuit of being providers and protectors, are systematically manipulated by women.
Okay.
She argues that men are essentially defined by their work,
Hmm.
which they perform largely for the benefit of women who, she claims, largely avoid work.
Okay, so she's painting a picture of men as these workhorses constantly striving to please women and meet their demands.
Exactly.
Let's see.
And she uses some interesting examples to illustrate this point. Like, in the chapter titled The Slave's Happiness, she describes a scenario where a woman gets a flat tire and a man passing by immediately starts to help.
Mm-hmm.
Vilar argues that this act, seemingly chivalrous, actually highlights how conditioned men are to serve women,
Okay.
even at their own expense.
So she's saying that even these acts of kindness are part of a larger pattern of manipulation.
That's her argument. She believes men are almost instinctively wired to be helpful, to solve problems,
I see.
even when it inconveniences them.
Okay.
And women, she suggests, have learned to capitalize on this tendency.
That's a pretty bold claim. Makes you wonder if there's any truth to it, right?
Right.
Have you ever felt pressured to help someone even when it wasn't convenient? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Motivation Library for more deep dives like this.
Now, another key element of Vilar's argument is that women have mastered the art of manipulation through a combination of praise and self-abasement.
That's an interesting combination. How does that work exactly?
Well, she argues that women use praise strategically to make men feel validated and dependent on their approval.
Mm-hmm.
This, of course, encourages men to work harder, strive to maintain that approval.
So it's like a reward system.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And at the same time, she says women present themselves as helpless and incapable,
Mm-hmm.
prompting men to swoop in and take care of everything.
Okay.
It creates this dynamic where men feel needed and important, which, according to Vilar, further reinforces their subservient role.
It's a fascinating perspective. Makes you think about the dynamics you see in your own life and in the relationships around you.
Right. And she provides a whole dictionary of coded female phrases that she claims reveal their manipulative undertones.
Like what?
For example, when a woman says, "I don't believe in women's liberation," Vilar decodes this as a way of signaling her dependence on men and reinforcing traditional gender roles.
That's pretty insightful. It makes you wonder how much of our communication, both verbal and nonverbal, is driven by these, well, subconscious desires to manipulate or be manipulated.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Vilar doesn't shy away from tackling some of the most controversial aspects of gender dynamics.
Such as?
One of her most provocative claims is that women lack genuine feelings.
Whoa, hold on a second. Isn't that a bit of an overgeneralization?
It's definitely a controversial statement.
Yeah.
But she goes on to explain that women, in her view, suppress men's emotions while cultivating a myth of their own sensitivity.
So she's saying that women are essentially playing a role, putting on a show of emotions that aren't necessarily genuine.
That's how she sees it. She gives the example of a woman crying, which men often interpret as a sign of sensitivity and vulnerability.
Yeah.
But Vilar suggests that this could very well be a calculated tactic to elicit sympathy to get what they want.
That's a pretty cynical take on female emotions. Do you think there's any nuance to that argument, or is it overly simplistic?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Vilar is presenting a deliberately provocative argument.
Right.
She's trying to challenge conventional thinking,
Sure.
make us question our assumptions about gender roles.
Right. She's definitely not afraid to shake things up and make people uncomfortable.
And she certainly doesn't stop there. She also tackles the topic of sex, arguing that it's a powerful tool for manipulation.
Okay, here's where things get really interesting.
Right.
What's her take on sex and how it plays into this whole dynamic?
Vilar argues that women use sex as a reward for men's labor and to secure their continued commitment.
Mm-hmm.
She even goes so far as to draw a comparison between wives and prostitutes,
Oh, wow.
stating that prostitutes are among the few women who frankly admit that they make money by renting out a specific orifice of their bodies.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement even by today's standards. But clearly, Vilar isn't afraid to push boundaries.
Absolutely. And she connects this idea to the broader societal structures that she believes reinforce these power dynamics.
So she's not just focusing on individual relationships, but on the systems that shape those relationships.
Exactly. She argues that institutions like the legal system, the media, even religion, all play a role in perpetuating the system of male manipulation.
Hmm.
And she doesn't shy away from criticizing those systems for what she sees as their harmful effects on men.
It's a pretty sweeping critique of society. So how does she see those institutions contributing to this manipulation?
Well, for example, she argues that the legal system, particularly in cases of divorce and child custody, often favors women, giving them a disproportionate amount of power over men's finances and their relationships with their children.
So she's saying that the very systems that are supposed to protect men are actually working against them.
That's her argument. And she believes this reinforces the idea that men are disposable and easily replaceable, while women are valuable and need to be protected.
It's definitely a thought-provoking perspective.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if there's any truth to it or if it's just an extreme interpretation of reality.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure. And speaking of unpacking, Vilar also delves into how this manipulation, well, how it plays out in specific areas of life, like the workplace, religion, even fashion.
Yes, absolutely. She argues that women often use their femininity to their advantage in the workplace.
Okay, how so?
Well, she suggests, for example, that they might charm their way into promotions or subtly rely on male colleagues to handle the more challenging tasks.
So it's not necessarily about like overt sexual manipulation,
Right.
but rather a more nuanced form of leveraging their gender to navigate the professional landscape.
Exactly.
Okay.
She points out the double standards that often exist for men and women in the workplace.
Yeah, like what?
For instance, men are expected to be assertive and ambitious, while women are sometimes rewarded for being submissive and agreeable.
Okay.
Vilar sees this as another form of manipulation that puts men at a disadvantage.
That's an interesting point. It makes you think about how certain behaviors are perceived differently based on gender.
Right, and Vilar believes this ultimately benefits women while hindering men in the workplace.
Now let's talk about religion.
Okay.
Vilar seems to have a rather critical view of organized religion in the context of male manipulation. How does she see that playing out?
Well, she argues that many religious doctrines emphasize obedience, humility, and self-sacrifice. Qualities that she believes are beneficial for women,
Okay,
but detrimental to men.
I see.
She sees religion as a system that can reinforce male subservience and keep men in a position of serving both women and the religious institution itself.
So in her view, religion is essentially another tool for controlling men.
That's her perspective.
Wow.
She sees it as a way of conditioning men to accept their subordinate role, to find meaning in their sacrifices.
And what about fashion? How does she connect that to the theme of manipulation?
Vilar sees fashion as a powerful tool for women to enhance their desirability and control men's attention.
Okay.
She argues that women use fashion to create an illusion of beauty and mystery, essentially turning themselves into objects of male desire.
So it's not just about women expressing themselves creatively through clothing,
Right.
but rather using fashion as a weapon.
Well, that's Vilar's rather provocative take on it.
Yeah.
She believes that this emphasis on female beauty reinforces men's obsession with women's appearances and distracts them from the reality of the power dynamics at play.
It's a fascinating perspective. It makes you think about the role that fashion plays in shaping our perceptions of beauty and desirability.
And it raises some interesting questions about the lengths people go to in order to attract and manipulate each other.
Now, aside from these broader societal structures, Vilar also outlines specific tactics that she believes women use to manipulate men. Can you give us some examples?
Of course. She talks about things like playing the victim, using guilt trips and emotional blackmail, and constantly shifting expectations to keep men off balance.
So it's not just about overt demands or threats,
Right.
but rather a more subtle psychological game.
Exactly. And she argues that these tactics are often so ingrained in our culture that we don't even recognize them as manipulation.
That's a scary thought. It's like we're all playing these games without even realizing it.
And that's precisely what Vilar wants us to see. She wants us to become aware of these subtle forms of manipulation so that we can make more conscious choices in our relationships.
So what does Vilar have to say about love? Is genuine love even possible in this world where she sees so much manipulation and exploitation?
That's a great question, and she actually devotes a whole chapter to love toward the end of the book. But it might not be the kind of love story you're expecting.
Oh, how so?
Well, Vilar's perspective on love isn't exactly romantic or idealistic. She sees love as another tool for manipulation,
Okay.
a way for women to secure male devotion and sacrifice.
So she's not buying into the whole love conquers all narrative.
Not quite. While she acknowledges that men can feel intense love for women, she suggests that this love is often rooted in delusion and a need for self-deception.
Okay.
She believes men are often blinded by their conditioning and their desire to believe in an idealized version of women.
So in her view, men are essentially fooling themselves when they fall in love.
She's not necessarily saying it's a conscious deception.
Okay.
But she argues that men often ignore red flags and rationalize their partner's behavior because they're so invested in the idea of being in love.
That's a pretty cynical take on love, but it does align with her overall perspective on gender dynamics.
Yes, and she ultimately concludes that true, authentic love will remain elusive as long as this dynamic of manipulation persists.
So she's saying that we're all caught in a system that prevents us from experiencing genuine connection and love.
Yeah.
That's a rather bleak outlook.
It is, but it's important to remember that Vilar is presenting a deliberately provocative argument.
Right.
She wants to challenge our assumptions,
Sure.
force us to think critically about love, relationships, and the roles we play in them.
And that's never a bad thing, right? Even if you don't agree with everything she says, it's about sparking a conversation,
Right.
prompting us to examine our own beliefs and behaviors.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a crucial question. What's the impact of all this manipulation on men? How does it affect their lives and well-being?
That's something Vilar explores in detail throughout the book.
Yeah.
She argues that this constant pressure to perform and provide takes a toll on men, both psychologically and emotionally.
She points out that men are often driven to exhaustion and burnout as they strive to meet the demands of work and relationships.
Yeah.
She even suggests that this pressure can contribute to higher rates of suicide among men.
That's a serious accusation.
Yes, and it's a point that she makes with quite a bit of passion.
Yeah.
She also highlights the emotional toll of this manipulation, arguing that it can lead to feelings of inadequacy, resentment, and a sense of being trapped.
It's a pretty damning indictment of the way men are often treated in society.
And she doesn't just blame women.
Oh.
She also criticizes men for what she sees as their willing complicity in this system.
So she's pointing a finger at both genders.
Exactly. She argues that men are so conditioned to be providers and protectors that they blindly accept their role as the manipulated party, even when it's clearly not in their best interests.
That's a really interesting point. So what's the solution? What does Vilar propose we do about this?
Well, Vilar isn't necessarily offering a step-by-step guide to fixing these issues.
Okay.
She's primarily a social critic, not a self-help guru. Her goal is to wake people up to the reality of these gender dynamics.
I see.
Encourage them to question the roles they've been assigned.
So it's about awareness and then making conscious choices to break free from these patterns.
Exactly. She believes that true freedom can only come from recognizing these patterns and choosing to live more authentically.
That's a powerful message. It's about taking responsibility for our own lives and our own choices rather than simply playing out roles that have been dictated by society.
And it's about challenging the systems and structures that perpetuate these harmful dynamics. Vilar's book is a call to action, a plea for both men and women to wake up and demand something better.
It's definitely a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it. It makes you look at the world with a new lens, and I think that's what great books are supposed to do.
I agree. Now, before we move on to our final thoughts on The Manipulated Man, I want to take a moment to remind you to like this video and subscribe to Motivation Library for more thought-provoking book summaries. We really appreciate your support.
Thanks, Sophia. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this deep dive. Now let's wrap things up and discuss some of the most impactful takeaways from The Manipulated Man. So, Sophie, as we wrap up this deep dive into The Manipulated Man, what are some of the most explosive takeaways that stand out to you?
Well, Steve, one of the things that struck me most is Villar's, it's radical, really. This suggestion that traditional notions of male dominance, might actually be a cleverly disguised form of female control.
Hmm.
She argues that men, driven by this deep-seated need to be providers, to be protectors,
Yeah.
become willing participants in their own manipulation.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating reversal of the kind of the typical feminist narrative, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it really forces us to question who is truly in control in these relationships.
Right.
Is it really manipulation if men are willingly playing along?
Oh,
Or is it more of a complex dance where both genders are enacting these roles that are dictated by societal norms and expectations?
exactly.
It's something for all of us to ponder. Wouldn't you agree, listeners?
I think that's the heart of the matter, Steve. Vilar seems to suggest that we are, to a certain extent, products of our conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. The toys we play with as children, the media we consume, the expectations that are reinforced by our family, by society, they all subtly contribute to this unspoken script of how men and women should behave.
And that's where her analysis of institutions really comes into play.
Right.
She doesn't let societal structures off the hook.
No.
Vilar argues that religion, education, even fashion, all play a role in perpetuating these dynamics. It's almost like a grand conspiracy theory of gender roles, isn't it?
Does feel a bit conspiratorial at times.
Yeah.
But there's a kernel of truth in there, too. Think about how often we see men encouraged to be strong, silent providers, while women are praised for their beauty, for their emotional expressiveness.
Yeah.
These messages are woven into the fabric of our culture,
Mm.
and they subtly shape how we perceive ourselves and each other.
It really makes you wonder, are we truly making free choices in our lives? Or are we just fulfilling roles that have been assigned to us from a very young age? Yeah. Vilar seems to believe that true freedom can only come from recognizing these patterns and consciously choosing to break free from them.
And I think that's where Villar's work is most valuable.
Yeah.
Even if her conclusions are controversial, might rub some people the wrong way, it's a call to awareness.
Yeah.
Whether you completely agree with her or not, the manipulated man compels you to examine your own beliefs and behaviors to become more conscious of the forces that shape your interactions with others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that these power dynamics between men and women are incredibly complex and multifaceted.
Yeah.
There aren't any easy answers or clear-cut villains in this story.
No.
It's about recognizing the subtle ways in which we all participate in these systems, often unconsciously. It's about understanding the nuances, the gray areas.
Absolutely.
And perhaps, most importantly, it's about asking ourselves some difficult questions.
Yeah.
So, as our listeners continue to explore the dynamics of their own relationships and their place in the world, what's one question, one challenge that you would like to leave them with?
I think the most important question to ask, and one that Villar's work constantly prompts us to consider, is this. Are you living a life that you've genuinely chosen, or are you simply playing a role that's been chosen for you?
That's such a powerful question, Sophia. It really gets to the heart of what it means to be an individual, to be truly free.
It's a challenging question, no doubt about it. But it's one that can lead to profound self-discovery, a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And who knows, it might even lead to more authentic and fulfilling relationships with the people in our lives.
Absolutely. And if you're hungry for more perspectives on gender, on power, relationships, we've got some fascinating resources linked in the description below.
We encourage you to explore those resources, continue this conversation, and of course, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the manipulated man, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Motivation Library for more thought-provoking book summaries.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep challenging those assumptions.